So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinars. Apologies for the late start. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty at the top. And so we're here now, and we're excited to talk about the barriers and challenges in leaving homelessness. First, we want to begin with the land acknowledgement. As we begin today, we wish to respectfully acknowledge that the land on which we gather is Treaty 6 territory and the traditional meeting ground for many Indigenous peoples. Edmonton, also known as, and I'm going to get this wrong, but I'm practicing and I think we show up imperfectly and I think that matters, also known as Amiskwachiwaskahikan, or Beaver Hills House, has long provided a traveling route and home to the Cree, Blackfoot, and Métis, as it did for the Nakota, Tsuut'ina, Chipewyan, and other Indigenous peoples. Their spiritual and practical relationships to the land create a rich heritage for our learning and for our life as community. About Bissell Centre. Bissell Centre is dedicated to the elimination of poverty in the community. The way we work towards achieving this goal is by supporting community members with emergent and basic needs, building relationships and trust, and guiding people through various programs such as housing, employment, and childcare. My name is Scarlett Bjornson, and I am Bissell Centre's communication specialist. And with us today, our expert on the issue that we're talking about is Laila Bellony. She is a team lead with Bissell Centre Housing Services. Laila has been working in the homeless serving sector since 2014 and recently graduated from MacEwan's social work program with distinction. Her work in social support started with youth in Ontario, and when she moved to Edmonton in 2014, she began working with vulnerable adults for the first time. She began her career at Bissell Centre providing frontline administration support at reception. And just a little fun fact, Laila was actually the inspiration for our Drop Your Gaunch campaign that we have annually. She noticed there was a need that women were being handed men's boxers, and thus the Drop Your Gaunch campaign began. So she carried that role for 3 years before moving into the role of outreach housing worker. Laila has held roles from outreach worker, housing first case manager, as well as frontline support at different agencies in Edmonton, such as Boyle Street Community Services, George Spady, and Edmonton Schizophrenia Society. She finds this work allows her to be informed, reflective, fair, and open-minded, and it's why she continues to do this work. And I'm so grateful that you're here today to talk about this with us, Laila.
Thanks for having me.
So today, we're here to talk about challenges and barriers that community face when leaving homelessness. We have anecdotal scenarios that we'll pull, but to protect privacy and anonymity for our clients and the community members that we serve, we're not going to use names, and we'll just bring in some of that anecdotal information while we're talking through some of these pieces. So Laila, can you walk us through an ideal housing situation and like what that looks like?
Yeah, so for the ideal housing situation, we would love to see something that's low barrier. And so when we say low barriers, we're looking at anything that really could hinder the housing process. So that would include factors like mental illness, medical concerns, financial or administrative limitations. These barriers really largely affect the pace of the housing. Other types of delays are caused by the complexity of the applications process for housing. Coordination between all the systems involved in supporting an individual to housing can be really tricky, and those communication pieces can also contribute to delays in finalizing housing. As well, personal administrative pieces, like a person having ID or a bank account, or simply just being able to be found easily. These are all conducive to the success of housing and like a relatively swift housing. Right now we're seeing a very competitive rental market. And so in the ideal situation, we would have a greater selection of suitable units for our clients to choose from. To go along with that, we need to be sure that when a person is housed, that their medical needs are taken into account. So in-home medical supports are always in high demand. And if a client has a medical condition that requires regular care, we need to accommodate for that when addressing their housing. So does this person have any mobility concerns? Is this person a fall risk? These are all kind of questions that we need to be asking throughout the process when evaluating what would be appropriate housing for someone. So the ideal situation, a participant would really just be able to be quickly and safely housed in a place that they can feel attached to and feel proud of.
So really somebody who's just like kind of like fallen down on their, you know, had some bad luck and they've found themselves homeless. And is this the normal scenario? Is this the normal case in which you're faced with, you know, trying to help somebody through the housing process?
It's definitely not the norm. For us, the normal is all those things that I just like pointed out, all the things that come with a lot of intense barriers and challenges in the process. We hardly ever see a person in our specific area of housing, which is dealing mostly with encampments, that is just kind of down on their luck. There are avenues for those folks, definitely, at the Bissell. However, the groups that we typically work with do come with a bit more challenges to their situation.
So what is the process from living in encampment to being housed? Because I think there's a misconception out there in the community that, and you see it in the social spheres, just give them a house. What's the problem? So what is that process? And can you walk us through that?
For sure. So the first step really is, of course, contact. So an individual would first need to come in contact with our outreach team, and they would have that housing conversation with the person. Sometimes this happens over multiple meetings. So it really takes quite a bit of connection to be able to start the process. Next, they would need to get connected to a housing worker. And so once they are connected to a housing worker, they can get referred to and accepted to one of the bridge housing options. After that, they can move into the viewing stage. Once they find a unit that's suitable and like long-term sustainable for their like financial and medical needs and all those things, the client, with the help of the worker, needs to apply for that unit. After they apply for it, of course, they need to be accepted by the landlord or the property management company. So after they receive that approval, the worker then can arrange for things like insurance, utility, furniture, basic startup household items. And then only after all those pieces are in place is the client able to physically move into their new place. Once the client is in, the worker will continue to support them with like basic needs like food, etc., until a follow-up support worker is in place. And it's at this point that the clients can be transferred, and then that housing process would be complete.
So that sounds like that's a lot.
It is quite, yes.
Pretty intense.
Yes.
And
yes.
When you're moving from living in an encampment to moving into a house, there's so many steps, and that can probably be quite overwhelming.
It is overwhelming, and the coordination that it requires is really, I mean, the workers and the clients have to be, there needs to be so much syncopation to be able to make those transitions happen very smoothly. And, you know, all the while, I didn't even mention the paperwork, you know, the administrative piece that needs to be done all throughout that. So it is quite a lengthy process. It can be really lengthy.
Yeah, and I think that some people don't understand, like people who have been living outside for 1+ years, up to 10 years, however long they've been living outside. Now they're signing contracts and they're signing all of these things, and it's probably overwhelming. Like I said, overwhelming before, but even just thinking about it, I get overwhelmed thinking about it. So
yeah. It definitely bears repeating. It is an overwhelming process for individuals, and they're being asked to, of course, we want to make the housing happen as quickly as possible, but that also adds to the kind of anxiety-inducing elements of the housing process. It is really, we ask a lot for that to happen.
Sure.
We ask a lot of clients, yeah.
Yeah. So what are some of the more typical follow-up supports that community members leaving homelessness need? So we just have a very basic list, but you're the expert, and so elaborate as you need.
For sure. So participants, like they most often need help with basic needs immediately. So food, hygiene, clothing, those are the things that really are at the top of the list. Also, it's sort of a habitual and reoccurring need that is that overlaps from before they were housed. So those continue to be their focus. And then for us on our side, supports with mental or physical health concerns, putting those, getting them connected to those kind of resources. So this might look like scheduling appointments for them or finding resources that, you know, are either new or kind of province-wide or something like that, that we can connect them with like online or through the phone or different things like that to meet those needs most immediately. Transportation is always a big one. People are often housed in residential areas that don't have social supports readily available. So getting to and from these supports, they require either the worker to support them with transportation or arrange for transportation or assist them in getting a bus pass or bus tickets so that they can kind of freely move around. Also, when clients are newly housed, it's a very demanding shift and it needs to be made almost instantly. So they need to become adept at tenancy management very quickly, cooking and cleaning and guest management, communicating with landlords or neighbors, all fall under the category of like good tenancy, being a good neighbor and so on. So follow-up support workers are there to help with those kinds of adjustments.
So you mentioned guest management and tenancy management. What are some of the other challenges a community members face? And so we can get into these at length. Like maybe the people who are watching today don't understand what guest management is and why that's a problem, and the emotional management piece.
Yeah, so guest and tenancy management are actually two really big ones. When you look at it, like really from an emotional standpoint, housing first participants, they're often required to choose between maintaining their housing or keeping their community. When you kind of have them move into these new places and all these kind of different factors that maybe they didn't need to consider before are all of a sudden at the forefront of whether or not they can keep their tenancy. So cooking is another one. Those who don't know how to cook, they need to learn to cook for themselves. Those who do know how to cook, they may need to readjust or become reacquainted with doing that for themselves in an unfamiliar space. When people are housed in market housing with additional supports, one of the most common questions that you hear is like, why? And the heightened scrutiny that continues after they secure housing and move in is always a factor. Assumptions are very regularly made about the participants that access programs like ours. And unfortunately, in a lot of the cases, the interactions that participants have with other tenants outside the program are informed by these assumptions. A common misconception.
If I could interrupt you just for a second, with the heightened scrutiny, we talked before about having a Saturday afternoon where we listen to music and clean the house. And so a housing first participant, some of the scenarios have been that there are assumptions that they could be having a party. And so all of a sudden there's a knock on the door. Exactly.
Yeah, like, I mean, just last night I was listening to show tunes and cooking and like singing at the top of my lungs. And I think if my neighbors or my landlord knew that I was housed through a program, that would pique somebody's interest and they would come and try and, you know, want to know like, why is it so loud? Even if they're, you know, doing this not within quiet hours or anything like that, it still bears some questioning. Or they're still subjected to that kind of line of questioning and those assumptions. So that tends to be really challenging. Another one is like the financial component. The misconception that the program provides long-term financial support. Actually, one of the functions of the program is to provide assistance with startup stuff. So that means that after the initial housing period, participants, they'll eventually need to manage their own finances, and they'll need to learn how to financially sustain their new housing and their new household by paying their bills on time, budgeting for their food and their services. Sometimes they need to budget for addiction, and their rent is it's third party, but that's also like a huge part of their income that's taken out of their monthly benefits. So all of this needs to come out of their already small income, and because we see participants both extremely susceptible to, because of those kinds of financial issues, we see that participants are pretty susceptible to like predatory lending and like survival crimes.
Like payday loans type things.
Yeah, pawn shops and those kinds of things.
Can we talk a little bit about the emotional management? So an example we have is somebody who lived outside for off and on for 40 years, moved inside and spent the first 2 weeks actually still sleeping outside because it felt very claustrophobic and isolating.
Yeah, the isolation piece is really something that a lot of newly housed participants struggle with, and that immediate change. So, you know, one, becoming attached to the space as like your space and feeling that like, you know, feeling that connection to your space, I don't think a lot of us really take into consideration that that's not an automatic thing that happens. What was a person's space for 40 years was like a tent or an encampment somewhere. And so now to have, it can feel really limiting, you know, like now it seems like there are more rules than there were before, or there's a lot more responsibility, or the space is closed in. It kind of adds to a lot of emotional like dysregulation for people, like really immediately. So there is an acclimation period that a lot of our participants have to move through super quickly, and without, you know, really being able to explain it to people how they're being affected, because we all think that, you know, we all just look at housing as a really positive shift and a positive change. So we don't always consider that there are some kind of negative perceptions that come with that.
Yeah. For guest management, can we just touch on that a little bit more too? I think maybe some people don't, who are watching, maybe don't fully understand what guest management is and why that is an issue for people who are newly housed.
For sure. So for a lot of our newly housed participants, they are the only person, maybe in their friend group or in their community, that's removed from the community at that time. And so all their connections are still in the same situation where, you know, they're sleeping outside. They have to hustle for everything that they get, and they're, you know, maybe the weather's changing, maybe it's super cold or super hot. And, you know, you as a person who has endured that with this friend group or this community now have the means to kind of provide them with a safer place or a more comfortable place. And, you know, the natural inclination is to allow them to come in. But you know, that creates challenges for maintaining a tenancy, so that, you know, sometimes it's loud, and sometimes, you know, you have all these people there that are not on the lease. You know, they are looked at as undesirables. So that sort of starts to put that person under a microscope. And, you know, it happens fairly early on in the process, because that's when the need is most immediate. That's when they can really see, okay, like now that I'm in a better situation, I'm going to be able to help my friends, my street family. Yeah,
my friends. And then the other really important piece, I think, is talking about the loss of autonomy. And so I was really, my eyes were open when we were talking and we were planning out our presentation today. And so, and I think that goes along with that emotional management. And when you said living inside can be very constricting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of like autonomy, you know, that's a value that we really hold highly in our society, to be able to self-govern, to choose the things that you feel are best for you. And throughout the housing process, we're really asking for people to basically hand over that autonomy to somebody who is very new in their life. Like they will not have a strong basis in or relationship with their new housing worker or their new follow-up worker. And you're asking these people to make decisions in your best interest. And hoping that they would make those decisions according to the way that you would make those decisions if you were making them on your own. And that's a lot of trust that needs to be kind of like, put into the relationship very, very early. It's a big ask.
And probably terrifying.
Yes.
What are some of the barriers a person faces after being housed? So we talked about removal from community and being housed away from agency supports.
Yeah, so for many people, the hot meals that are available at agencies will help them really stretch that budget out, right? And so it can also kind of help with like tenancy management for like people who are not used to cooking or are not used to cleaning, those sorts of things. It can really help to kind of mitigate some of those things. And so when you lose access or like easy access to those supports, it begins to be very difficult. The follow-up support workers in this field are phenomenal. They put a lot into their jobs, and even with all that they give, they are really limited in the amount of time that they can offer to each participant at a time. And so that's just due to the high level of need that really exists in this work. So in the same vein, most ICM level supports are really limited to 12 months. So those are just a couple of the barriers. Another thing is that, at the end of the 12 months, the client graduates the program, and at which point they need to ensure that they remain financially stable to avoid kind of any risk of eviction or like any interruption in their services, like their power or something like that. So additionally, once a client graduates the program, they're no longer able to access the rental subsidy through the program. So they need to be connected to another kind of subsidy or a different kind of income or another way to sustainably supplement their income before something like that happens. And that's just kind of adds to the financial stability piece. Yeah. Another barrier that we see is the lack of transportation. So part of the goal of the program is that the participant move kind of towards independence. So doing things like figuring out transportation to and from places like as simple as like the grocery store or the laundromat, that can be overwhelming because it requires multiple levels of coordination. So that looks like, finding your way there and back, figuring out how to transport your items that you've either just purchased or just washed to and from, the logistics of the route, how long it's going to take you to get there and back, or, is it a whole day thing? What is the cost if I take a cab? How is that going to affect the rest of my budget for the month? So even in running like basic errands, once you're housed, there is a whole lot of coordination that needs to happen. Let's see, another barrier connected to that financial piece is like communication. So clients are set up with phone services because it's, you know, a basic safety measure. So, however, when a client is stretched financially, one of the things that we see often is that they need to pawn their cell phone, or they need to shut off their services to be able to salvage some of that their budget for the month. So, you know, this is if they're housed in an area away from the inner city, this is their only source of communication. And
access to bus schedules, access to everything. Yeah.
Everything. Yeah. So that is their safety net, you know, against isolation. That is the way that they connect to find the things that they need. And it's often the first and most immediate option that they have to be able to try and save some money and deal with those financial pieces.
Things that a lot of us would take for granted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we prepared some important information for folks so that I'm at Bissell, so we're going to hear sirens. Important information for folks, just a little bit of myth busting, because I think that people think that people are completely financially dependent on programs, and that's not the case. And so if you want to just talk us through, and we're going to go a little bit over 12:45, so sorry, friends.
Okay, I'll be really quick. So bridge housing is not free. That is one of the things that I think is an assumption that's made often. So clients, they can be accepted to bridge housing without being on income, but once they are in bridge housing, that allows them to apply for an income, and once they get their income, it goes towards their lodging. Part of it goes towards their room and board there. Not everybody is on income supports. Many are, yes, but there are clients who have their own money via things like settlements or residential school or 60 scoop payments, inheritances, or natural supports that help them, usually from like out of province or something. Some participants actually do work to improve their situation, like panning and bottle collecting. Like, these are forms of work. People are out there at 7 o'clock in the morning working for 12 hours to be able to supplement their income. Yeah, we're aware that there's crime in the community. However, what we don't hear much about is the safety in the community, and so how the community rely on each other for help, and safety and strength in numbers, for company and companionship and chosen family, and those kind of like emotional supports that exist in the unhoused community. And I don't think we hear enough about it. And then housing programs are not forever. So clients need to figure out how to cope with and sustain a new normal once they're housed. They need to be able to problem solve in a new way than they had done before. They need to figure out how to adjust to shifting financial circumstances when they graduate the program, especially. Also, the program doesn't cover everything. There are specific basic needs that basic need items that the program is able to cover. So participants really need to work fervently towards achieving that financial independence by their graduation. So I think each of us at some point has heard someone say that like people just want to live outside. And from what I've seen, that's a bit of a generalization and a bit of a reach. No one wants to live outside. It's not safe, it's not convenient, it's not really comfortable. And the effects of the extreme weather that we experience here in Edmonton, the effects that it can have, it really, it doesn't bear any further explanation. So a person experiencing mental health crisis may not want to live alone. They may not feel safe in their home. In another instance, we had a community member repeatedly decline housing, and after they were able to build a trusting relationship with the staff member, then they disclosed to that person that they couldn't read, and that was the barrier that was keeping them unhoused. So the answer is never really as simple as we think that it's going to be. There's always additional factors. So I would just encourage people to ask questions, ask more than one question, and look, beyond what your scope of understanding would be for the situation.
I think that's great. We're going to open the floor up for questions now, but Brandon, who's at Homer Trust, told me to open up my Q&A and I didn't. So I need to stop sharing my screen just for a second, then I'm going to bring it back up. We have 51 participants. And so if you have any questions, please pop them into the chat and we can answer them for you. Cheryl Cleef, I'm so sorry if I say that wrong. She says, thank you for your fantastic presentation. This has given me a more thorough understanding of homelessness and the barriers people face. One thing we hear often from citizens is about housing and crime. How have you addressed the opposition from citizens for you to do your work? I think, and Laila, you can take that, but if you like.
Oh, you can.
I think the biggest thing that we work here really hard to do is at Bissell is try to grow empathy in the community and explain where some of that crime can come from. So we call them survival crimes. And so while it's not okay if a person is, has stolen something from you, it's not personal. They're not trying to hurt you. It does hurt you. They're just trying to make it through the day. Sex work, things like that. These are just ways that folks survive. Panhandling, lots of people in the community look down on that. As Laila mentioned, that is hard work. It takes a lot of humility to ask strangers for money just so you can sustain your life.
And we also try to really remove some of those barriers as much as possible. But it does take time. And so that's the major thing, is that there's a huge acclimation process and there is a huge transition process that needs to happen. Some people, would like to see it happen faster, of course, but it takes us time to kind of remove those barriers, to build that trust, to say, okay, like, what is it that's going to keep you from making this decision that might be harmful to your neighbors? How do we get in between that? How do we provide that stopgap for you so that we can remove that need, and then you can focus on something else, or understand that there are alternatives. So we do try to kind of work on that with clients, and then also we try to really work on that removing of stigma attached to the program, and attached to people who are newly housed. We try to sort of bring some knowledge to the community about the ins and outs of the community that we work with.
Yeah. Where and how will the recording be made available? And so that it'll be available on housingmonth.ca in the next couple of days. And so there's a really awesome team in the background that downloads the video, and I'm here to support them if they need help with that, but they've been doing an excellent job all month. What is the average timeline for a client from application to being housed as a single or as a family? And so I'm sure this varies, but yeah.
Yeah, it definitely varies. I think, we've had very lucky, like the unicorn of circumstances that would see a person have like a 2-week turnaround, but that is a situation with like 0 barriers.
Yeah.
Our typical situation, we're looking at like anywhere from like 3 months onwards. We've recently just housed a client that we took on in the spring. So it sometimes takes a really, really long time. And that's just for market housing. If the need is for permanent supportive housing, that gets into a really long kind of holding pattern. That could be a year, 2 years. So. And
there's you have a client that you've worked with, and she's a double amputee, and she goes into the hospital. The paramedic, or I guess in her daily life, the living outside, the paramedics will come and help her change her catheter, like right on the street or on her tent, in her tent, sorry. And then if she gets an infection, she'll end up going back into the hospital, and she gets discharged into homelessness.
Right. Yeah. And so, if we can get people connected to resources and things like at hospital or something like that, then at least we, or in bridge housing, at least we know how and where to find them. But once a person is like discharged or, you know, moved along from where their camp used to be, then we lose contact, and that definitely prolongs the housing process, because now we have to find them so that we can pick up from where we left off. And it depends on how much time has elapsed, because if it's a long period of time that goes by, then we need to start over.
Yeah. Your discussion of, excuse me. Hold on one second. Your discussion of challenges seems to make clear that rehousing unhoused people quickly would be the ideal to make the transition back to being housed much easier. Not to mention, there would be less time for physical or mental health damage. That is just a comment. It is not a question, but yes.
Yes.
What percentage of program clients are women? Are there specific challenges they face? I think like the percentage of people, of women who are people who identify as women who are experiencing homelessness right now is 45%, I believe. I could be wrong on that, and I will correct myself after and get you new information. But so what are some of those specific challenges?
Safety is a huge one. Some people who like have, I guess, like we've worked with mother-daughter pairs, and they are sleeping rough. So if you house one or the other, they kind of lose that that kind of strength in numbers that they have. You know, another thing is like we definitely have people who are pregnant. There are programs specifically for that, and like recently we were referred to someone who was sleeping rough and pregnant. So that, you know, getting them connected to programs like the HER program or Health for Two, that will help them sort of maintain and get their, you know, prenatal vitamins and all those sorts of things. That is like, that's a reality out there. Also, if there are, you know, like custody issues and stuff like that, if there are families involved, you know, in order to keep those families together or help in a way that can ensure that, you know, children and families are like not experiencing like additional trauma at the hands of like the system, we do need to like move quickly and sort of get some extra supports in place and stuff like that. So we do see a lot of, we see some families, those safety would be the main concern for vulnerable women.
We're getting a lot of questions on how to refer to our program, and so I'm going to take those questions offline, and I will respond. I will respond to you separately. And I believe, yeah, so how to get in touch with some of our programs. And so again, I will take those questions offline. Let's see if we have any more questions. Oh, thank you, Brandon. So Brandon did confirm as of today, 44% of those on the by names list identify as female. So thank you for being awesome, Brandon. Just going to share my screen quickly again. I think that's all we have for questions today, aside from the ones I'll take offline. Just 1 second. Forgive me for, I'll just skip through. This is not working for me. So you see my presentation, and I think that's just going to have to be okay today. So first of all, in conclusion, I want to say thank you to Laila for bringing her expertise to our talk. We really value you here at Bissell Center and the heart that you have for community members. And thank you for attending our webinar today. We are grateful to be in partnership with Homeward Trust, Savita, CMHC Edmonton, Yes, Métis Housing, HomeEd, and City of Edmonton. Please head to housingmonth.ca and sign up for the remaining presentations. We can end homelessness together. And so have a great day, everyone, and take really good care of each other.